By the late summer of 1944, the Second World War had been raging across Europe for 5 long years. The Allied forces, including soldiers from Great Britain, the United States and Canada, had successfully landed in Normandy, France on D-Day. They were pushing the German army back, fighting their way across France and Belgium. The end of the war seemed closer than ever before, but the German resistance was still fierce and determined. Allied leaders were desperate to find a way to finish the conflict before another harsh winter set in, which would cost many more lives and resources. They needed a plan that was audacious, fast, and could deliver a decisive blow. The idea that emerged was Operation Market Garden, a brainchild of the British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. This was one of the most ambitious plans of the entire war. It was designed to bypass the heavily fortified German defensive line, known as the Siegfried Line, by going through the Netherlands. The goal was to secure a series of key bridges over major rivers and canals. If successful, this would open a direct route into Germany's industrial heartland, the Ruhr Valley. Capturing this area would cripple the German war machine, and the Allies hoped to bring about a surrender by Christmas of 1944, ending the terrible conflict much sooner than expected. The operation was divided into 2 distinct parts, which gave it its unique name. The market part was the airborne operation, the largest of its kind in history. It involved dropping 3 entire airborne divisions, the American 101st and 82nd and the British 1st, deep behind enemy lines. Their mission was to seize the vital bridges and hold them until relief arrived. The garden part was the ground assault. This involved the British 30 Corps, a powerful armoured force, which would race up a single narrow road, linking up with the paratroopers at each captured bridge, creating a 60-mile-long corridor into Germany. The plan was a massive gamble, relying heavily on speed, surprise, and perfect coordination between the air and ground forces. Many commanders felt it was too risky. The single road, which the troops nicknamed Hell's Highway, could easily be cut by German counterattacks, trapping the entire ground force. The paratroopers would be lightly armed and completely dependent on the swift arrival of the tanks for support. Despite these serious concerns and the potential for disaster, the Allied High Command, eager for a quick victory, gave the green light. The stage was set for a dramatic and fateful battle in the flat, waterlogged landscape of the Netherlands. On the morning of Sunday, September 17, 1944, the skies over England filled with the roar of thousands of aircraft. A vast armada of transport planes and gliders carried over 35,000 Allied paratroopers towards their designated drop zones in the Netherlands. The sheer scale of the airborne assault was breathtaking, a clear signal of the Allies' determination to see the plan through. The soldiers of the American 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions, along with the British 1st Airborne, were heading into the unknown. They knew their mission was critical, to capture and hold the bridges at Eindhoven, Sun, Nijmegen, and most importantly, the final bridge over the Lower Rhine at Arnhem. The initial landings were surprisingly successful, catching the German defenders largely by surprise. In the south, the American 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, landed near Eindhoven and quickly set about securing their objectives, though they found the crucial bridge at Sun had been blown up by the Germans just before they arrived. To the north, the 82nd Airborne, the All-Americans, managed to capture the bridge over the Maas River at Grave intact, a significant early victory for the Allies. They also secured the high ground around Groesbeek, which was vital for defending against German counterattacks and protecting the landing zones for future waves of troops and supplies. Simultaneously, the garden part of the operation began as the British 30 Corps, led by powerful Sherman tanks, surged forward from the Belgian border. Their advance up the single road was meant to be a lightning-fast dash to relieve the paratroopers. However, they almost immediately ran into trouble. The narrow road was flanked by soft, marshy ground, making it impossible for the tanks to spread out. This created a massive traffic jam and made the column a perfect target for German anti-tank guns hidden in the woods and villages along the route. The progress of the ground forces was dangerously slow from the very start. Meanwhile, furthest to the north, the British 1st Airborne Division, known as the Red Devils, landed near Arnhem. Their situation was the most perilous of all. Their drop zones were located 8 miles away from their main objective, the road bridge at Arnhem. This long distance meant they had to fight their way through unknown territory just to reach the bridge. Worse still, they soon discovered that the German forces in the area were far stronger than intelligence reports had suggested. Unbeknownst to the Allies, 2 elite SS panzer divisions were refitting nearby and were ready to mount a swift and brutal counterattack against the lightly armed British paratroopers. The battle for the bridge at Arnhem quickly became the focal point of the entire operation. Only one small group of British paratroopers, led by Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, managed to fight their way through the tightening German cordon to reach the northern end of the bridge. There they dug in and prepared to defend their small foothold against overwhelming odds. For days, Frost's men held on with incredible bravery, fighting off relentless attacks from German infantry, armored cars, and tanks. They were completely surrounded and cut off from the rest of their division, which was desperately trying to break through the German lines to relieve them. The British soldiers at the Arnhem Bridge were in a desperate situation. They were running critically low on ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Radio communication, which was essential for coordinating with their own forces and the advancing 30 Corps, failed almost completely. This meant they could not call for accurate air support or let anyone know their exact position or status. The Germans, with their superior numbers and heavy weaponry, systematically destroyed the buildings the British were using for cover. The paratroopers fought on heroically, but it was clear that without immediate relief, their position was hopeless. The bridge at Arnhem was proving to be a bridge too far. Further south, the progress of the British 30 Corps was agonizingly slow. They were constantly harassed by German attacks along Hell's Highway. Every time the Germans cut the road, the entire Allied advance ground to a halt, while engineers and infantry fought to clear the way. The delay at the Somme Bridge, which had to be replaced by a temporary Bailey Bridge, cost them precious hours. Even after linking up with the American paratroopers at Eindhoven and Nijmegen, the final push towards Arnhem was fraught with difficulty. They were still many miles away, and time was running out for the beleaguered British paratroopers fighting for their lives. After 4 days of brutal non-stop fighting, the small force of British defenders at the Arnhem Bridge was finally overrun. Colonel Frost was wounded and captured, and the remaining soldiers were either killed or taken prisoner. The Germans now had full control of the vital bridge. The rest of the British 1st Airborne Division, which had suffered terrible casualties trying to reach the bridge, was trapped in a small pocket on the west side of Arnhem near the village of Oosterbeek. Their fight for survival continued, but the primary objective of Operation Market Garden, the capture of the Arnhem Bridge, had failed completely. With the Arnhem Bridge back in German hands and the British 1st Airborne Division facing annihilation, the Allied command made the difficult decision to call off the operation. The new goal was to evacuate as many of the trapped paratroopers as possible. On the night of September 25th, under the cover of darkness and a heavy artillery barrage, the survivors made their desperate escape across the lower Rhine River. Boats ferried the exhausted, wounded men to the southern bank, where they were met by the soldiers of 30 Corps. It was a somber and heartbreaking retreat, marking the definitive end of the bold gamble. The human cost of Operation Market Garden was immense. The Allies suffered over 17,000 casualties, including soldiers killed, wounded, and captured. The British 1st Airborne Division was virtually destroyed. Of the more than 10,000 men who had landed, fewer than 2,200 made it back across the river. The failure was a combination of factors: flawed intelligence that underestimated German strength, a plan that was too rigid and optimistic, poor weather that hampered air support and resupply drops, and the critical failure of radio communications. The single road of advance for the ground forces proved to be the operation's fatal weakness, just as many had feared. The failure of the operation had significant consequences for the war. The hope of a swift victory before the end of 1944 was shattered. The Allied advance stalled, and the war in Europe would drag on through another long, bloody winter. The front line in the Netherlands stabilized, leaving much of the country still under German occupation. The Dutch people, who had celebrated the arrival of the Allies, suffered terribly during the subsequent hunger winter. where thousands starved due to a German blockade on food supplies. The liberation they had hoped for would not come for another 7 agonizing months. Despite its ultimate failure, Operation Market Garden remains a testament to the incredible courage and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought there. The paratroopers who dropped from the sky and the tankers who battled their way up Hell's Highway displayed extraordinary bravery against impossible odds. The battle for the bridges in the Netherlands became a legendary, if tragic, chapter in the history of the Second World War. It served as a harsh lesson that in war, even the most daring and brilliantly conceived plans can be undone by unforeseen circumstances, enemy resilience, and the simple friction of combat.